Hey everybody, welcome back to your Full Tilt Tech Industry Leadership Talks podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host, and boy, what an episode we have lined up for you today. We have with us here today Brendan Groves. He is the Vice President of Regulatory and Policy Affairs at Skydio. I'm sure you all know about Skydio, but if you don't, it is the largest U.S. drone manufacturer in the world and a leader in autonomous flight. So welcome, Brendan.
Thanks so much, Don. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be talking today about the theme Brendan selected, which is leading innovation amidst uncertainty. But before we do that, Brendan, would you mind just giving us a little bit of background about yourself to set the stage?
Sure, of course. Well, it's obviously great to be reconnected with you. You and I met when we were both officers in the Air Force, me more junior than you years ago. So glad that we've graduated from wearing camouflage to work, I guess. But I started out my career as an Air Force JAG, as did you, and got to do a lot of national security work. Was very fortunate in that. Deployed, of course, downrange with special ops, and then ended up spending quite a long time as a civilian leader in the national security space in the civilian side at the National Security Agency and also at the Department of Justice before pivoting to Skydio. And drones and aviation and technology and security have been at the center of my career for as long as I can remember.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Brendan, you are exactly correct. You and I met in the JAG Corps, and for everybody out there, this guy has always been a rock star. I remember, I think I was like a lieutenant colonel perhaps, and I'm thinking you were a senior captain, maybe a junior major. And we were at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, like Intel Law kind of annual conference or something. And that's when I first met Brendan, because he was up on the stage receiving an award for his work in intelligence law pretty early on in his career. And I just remember thinking, wow, this guy is a fast burner. I need to get to know him. And that's where I remember that we first met. And it's left a lasting impression on me.
Well, yeah, no, and that was fun. You know, I don't think there are a lot of JAGs working on national security stuff, so you know, it's a small pool, right? So it's easier to get recognized in that. But no, yeah, obviously fun that we both ended up in the same space.
Yeah, absolutely, and even now. So I want to talk a little bit first about the theme you selected, this leading innovation amidst uncertainty, and ask you, what does it mean to you, basically why you selected this particular theme for today?
Right, so innovation and uncertainty go hand in hand, right? Successful innovators learn how to deal with and wrestle with doubt. And throughout my career, and many folks watching now or later, the art of success is managing risk and changing doubt into certainty. And I think there are some interesting ways to do that. In the public imagination, we think that successful innovators deal with doubt through, you know, sheer technical brilliance and fanatical devotion. And that's true, right? Folks like Elon and Steve Jobs come to mind as having both of those characteristics in spades. But I think there's actually another characteristic that's equally, maybe even more important, and that's storytelling. And I've always considered myself a storyteller. You know, that's what I do. It's certainly what I did. It's what we did as JAGs, as prosecutors. But it's also what leaders do, right? Not just leaders in business, but leaders in the public space as well. You know, innovators are often the best storytellers because they can paint a picture of not the way things are, but the way that they should be. Cast a vision and motivate others to achieve that. Because stories shape who we are. And I think anytime you're trying to do something new, you have to tell the world why this new thing needs to happen, how it can happen, and then how we're going to get there together as a group. And that to me is really where the magic happens. It's where I've been lucky to spend a lot of time working on interesting problems, either at senior levels in the Department of Justice or now at Skydio, which has grown by leaps and leaps and bounds from when I joined the company 3 years ago. And I just should say in closing that I think when you talk about the technology space, you always think first about engineers, and you should, because engineers, build the futures, whether it's zeros and ones or sticks and stones or magnesium and metal. That is indispensable. But what you often see behind every successful story of technology innovation is that engineers worked really closely with what you might call visionaries, people who can imagine a future end state, call others to achieve it together. And I've always pictured myself in that role. I'm definitely not an engineer. I would fail out of that real fast. But what I can do is paint a picture of what the world should look like and maybe cast a vision about how to get there. And that's what I really enjoy. And I think there are a lot of others in this space that enjoy the same thing.
No, I couldn't agree more, because when you think about this concept of storytelling, it's really about communication. And at the end of the day, we're going to talk about your career here shortly, Brendan. The skills I think that attorneys learn, couple that with, what you learn in the military, as an officer and a leader, when you're thrust into leadership roles very early in your career. I think those two things are a magical combination, for this storytelling, this Imagineering, as you call it, in the tech world, honestly, especially on the attorney side, where you're constantly looking at complex problems, and in a courtroom, as you know, having to distill them down in a way that is understandable to non-technical people, non-legal people, to sometimes convince them beyond a reasonable doubt, right, for your side, if you will. So no, I can't, I agree 100% with everything you just said. And what I want to do now, Brennan, is talk a little bit about, let's kind of go back in time, because the Imagineer you are today, the way you lead innovation amidst uncertainty, had its roots early on in your past and your childhood. And I love to start there with people. So would you mind telling us a little bit about your upbringing, like where you're from, because I really feel like it informs the person that you've become today.
Sure, yeah. So I'm from Wichita, Kansas, the big city in a little state, but spent a lot of time throughout the year growing up on a family farm, multi-generational, outside of Dodge City. But what really impacted me most was the fact that Wichita has an Air Force base, Connell, and I grew up going to air shows. No one in my family had anything to do with the Air Force, had anything to do with the military besides a grandfather who fought in World War II. But every year, as a young child, going to air shows and seeing the magic of flight, I told my parents when I was 4 years old that I would be an officer in the Air Force.
Wow, that early?
I did, yeah. And no one had been an officer in the military at all. And I'm not sure I knew exactly what it meant to be an officer at 4, but I declared that it would be the case. And I really wasn't kidding. I meant it. And so later on fulfilled that dream, but it was really just seeing the magic of flight. And that also led me to start flying at a very young age. So I got my pilot's license when I was 18, soloed at 16, just because aviation is really in the bloodstream in a place like Wichita that was at least formerly the air capital of the world.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know any of that about you. That is so cool. And just, the impacts that, seeing, as they say, is believing. And I dragged my kids to all of the air shows. None of them had decided to join the military. I don't know what that says about me, but super, super cool. So growing up then, the air shows, you got your pilot's license super young. Were there any other like formative events that occurred that kind of shape, your path and kind of who you've become?
Sure, sure, sure. So a little later on, after I decided to be an Air Force officer, maybe I was 10 or 11, I remember being tested for the gifted program, late in the summer after school based on performance the year before. And I was much less interested in studying for that test than I was in doing whatever else that summer. And and I remember finding out that I didn't pass. I was, just shy in math or something and over in English and whatever it was. But I remember being struck by the power of that statement because what it read to me was that you are not gifted, now and never.
Wow.
And I was struck by the power of that label, the fact that someone thought they had the ability to tell me,
Right.
whether I was gifted or not. And that moment really impacted me indelibly. So, a year or two later, I talked my way into gifted class, even though I, wasn't gifted. And I essentially made it my mission to prove that they were wrong and was able to, stay in that class and others like it through high school and went to law school at Yale later on. So to me, it was really, I think, the first time I recognized the power of labels and the power that they can have on people. And most people, I think, accept the labels that they receive from the outside. It's certainly easy to do that. It's very hard
Right.
to fight back and to recast your own narrative. But there's real power in that. And for me, that's why when I do offer labels to other people, I think it's really important to frame them in a way that encourages growth and change and doesn't set artificial barriers and glass ceilings that are often wrong.
Yeah.
Because I know that because it happened to me.
Wow. So I don't know a lot about your parents or, how they raised you, but, there's always this nature nurture debate, are people
Right,
born leaders, does their environment shape them? My personal belief is that there's a little of both there.
right.
For you to have that label put upon you and kind of accept that in a way as a challenge, like I'm going to prove them wrong, and then talk your way into the gifted class. I think that's really unique because I agree with you, Brendan. Labels oftentimes bring people down. Like they would accept that. I would say the average person might accept that and just
Sure.
kind of move on. I have to tell you though, as I'm listening to your story, I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy because the same thing kind of happened to me, but in
Huh.
college.
Yeah.
So I was going to the University of Scranton and looking through the little catalog, and there's this thing called the Special Jesuit Liberal Arts Program, and you have to be invited into it.
Huh.
Well, I never received that invite, right? It was like heavy philosophy, and I wrote to Father Ron. I'll never forget this, and I made an argument why I should be in it. And 2 weeks later, I got the letter that I was in it. Now, uh, I was in these classes, I mean, like logic and rhetorical analysis and, Aristotle 101 with all these really brilliant people. And I knew, like, in the back of my mind, like, I didn't get that invite,
Yeah.
that I kind of talked my way into it. But like you, I kind of accepted the challenge and I loved it. I mean, to me, sometimes also, if you give someone a bar, they might only reach that bar. So I always set that bar high, not only for myself, but for other people,
Yeah.
kind of as a leader.
Right.
So I think that's such a cool story. I think it's funny the parallels you and I have. So
Good.
tell me, growing up, we talked about these formative events. Was there like one saying that you heard either from your parents or a teacher or a coach or somebody along the way that kind of stuck with you as you kind of grew up and made your way through your educational experience and your career?
Yeah. I remember my mom telling me, quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, that you must do the thing you think you cannot do. And I remember before I deployed to Afghanistan, she gave me a little metallic piece with that quotation inscribed, and I took that on all of my missions outside the wire, because I didn't have exactly a desk job downrange, even though I was a lawyer. So every time I would go outside the wire, I would take that little inscription with me, along with a separate metal covered Bible that my grandfather, who was an infantryman in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, took with him on his entire combat experience in World War II. And I had both of those objects, every time I was outside of the wire at the base.
Wow. Okay, repeat the saying again from Eleanor Roosevelt.
It's a great quote. Yeah, you must do the thing you think you cannot do.
Wow, that's so powerful. Okay, so now it's all clicking for me, Brendan, because that brings me back to when you were 10 years old and they are like, hey, you're not gifted. And you're like, okay, you're telling me that's a thing I cannot do? Bring it on. And so I kind of thought there was some of your parents in there, and I'm hearing this from your mom. So that's a beautiful thing. Right. Very, very cool. So let's talk about your education, because you had this kind of, epiphany moment or pivotal moment, let's call it, like 10 years old, and then you get into the gifted program. You alluded to this, but you got into Yale. I mean, that's pretty significant. So tell us about that. Like, just, as kids, I don't think well, actually, I take it back. I did shoot for University of Pennsylvania. That is Ivy, and I'm from Philly, and I'd gone to a frat party there. I'm like, this is my destiny. And of course I got the rejection letter, wound up at University of Scranton, and made famous now by The Office. But you looked around and said, I'm applying to Yale. Was it like, were all the eggs in one basket, or did you have like a lot of backup plans?
No, I certainly had backup plans. In fact, Yale Law School rejected me as well. So I actually did my first year of law school at Duke, and was lucky to do well there, and I think be first in the class, and that enabled me to transfer to Yale. And so I didn't accept Yale's no as a no. I saw it as a maybe, and applied a year later and got in. And that was a totally magical experience. But in fact, it was sort of the same story repeating itself. I had always wanted to go to Yale Law, and wasn't willing to accept another option. So I only applied to Yale for my transfer application, and was just lucky to get in.
Well, I screwed up your timeline there, Brennan, so I apologize. So undergrad, you went to Pepperdine, which is also a pretty spectacular school, and I believe you did ROTC. Was that Air Force ROTC?
It was.
Okay. All right. So you go to undergraduate at Pepperdine, ROTC. Now, in the back of your mind, are you doing ROTC there thinking, I'm going to go into the Air Force JAG Corps?
I was primarily, yeah. That or becoming an intelligence officer, which was also an option, or a pilot. I definitely thought of spending a lifetime in the cockpit, but decided that I could do as much good, maybe even more, in a courtroom as I could in a cockpit, which I think was the right calculus to take. But I had a terrific time at Pepperdine, to be sure, and it prepared me well for the challenges that followed.
So then you went to Duke for a year, and then kind of argued your way into Yale Law, which I love. And so at what point then do you become an Air Force JAG? Did you apply while you were still at Yale? Did you work a job in between there? How did that work?
So I was super lucky to get selected as an ROTC cadet to be allowed to go to law school, right? I think they select one or two people.
You're right. And Brennan, I want to cut in, because there's a lot of people out there watching that either personally or might have family members interested in the JAG Corps. There's a lot of ways to enter, and what Brendan's talking about is so some of these programs are highly selective, like the ROTC kind of direct program, if you will. There's direct commission, which I did, which I graduated law school at Villanova Law,
right,
and I just went directly into the JAG Corps from there.
Yeah.
There's also people that, for example, could be intelligence officers or other officers, or even enlisted, that apply to law school and get into a funded legal education program. I feel like there's like 7 slots a year less. And then extended leave. Sometimes it's an ROTC person or another person where maybe they don't pay for you directly. You take some time off, you go to law school, they let you take a leave essentially, you pay your own way, and then you come back in as a JAG. I think I covered it, but you went the ROTC route.
I did, yeah. And for those out there, it is true. For some reason, the Air Force and other services like this too, they only let a handful of folks go directly to law school. They really want you not to do that. They want you to serve first and then go to law school later. But there is a way to do it. So if you want to do it, don't count yourself out. Let them tell you no, but you don't tell yourself no.
Yeah. So you did that. And what was your, by the way, I'm sorry, I'm like this, like Mickey Flanagan is out there saying he loves this, or she, I think it's a guy. Mickey, thank you, thank you, thank you. So what was your first duty assignment in the JAG Corps?
I was sent to Nellis Air Force Base in the beautiful city of Las Vegas.
Yes, yes. Well, really cool. I mean, the weapons school is there. They do Red Flag, which is kind of that almost like Top Gun-like event and things like this. So pretty cool thing to be exposed to right away.
Yeah, it was a really fantastic place to start. I mean, it's a long fall from, the Ivy League to the trenches and to the desert in Las Vegas, but it was a wonderful place to begin and was incredibly fortunate, I guess, to be able to prosecute, espionage and national security cases when I was in Las Vegas. Wish that some of those incidents wouldn't have happened, but because they did, I was, well positioned to get really unique experience very early on in my career. I think now, if as an attorney who's supervised others for quite a while now, would I let someone a year out of law school do the things that I was allowed to do? I don't know, but I'm glad that my supervisors were maybe too busy and gave me a ton of opportunities beyond what I deserved.
Well, your theme here is leading innovation kind of amidst uncertainty. And as a leader in the JAG Corps, you're always leading young, innovative attorneys amidst a lot of uncertainty because God knows what's going to walk in the door as an issue or, in this case, espionage. But clearly your boss, your staff judge advocate saw something in you that said, hey, this guy, he can handle an espionage case as a first assignment JAG. I mean, to foot stomp that, everybody, that's like super significant. That's very rare. Quick question on this though, Brennan. When you were at Yale Law, was criminal law something, being in the courtroom, something you kind of envisioned yourself doing, or did the JAG Corps kind of thrust you into that role?
Oh, definitely. No, I debated in college and high school and always envisioned myself speaking for a living.
Yep.
And growing up as a trial lawyer was a wonderful way to earn my stripes. As you know,
yes,
there are a few harder ways to earn a living than being a trial lawyer because you actually have to prove the assertions you make, which is not something that's true on Twitter, even with the blue check mark.
Exactly. And probably the toughest crowd, right? Having a jury of officers and sometimes enlisted members that you need to convince of something. And, so you went to Seymour Johnson as your second duty assignment, and there you got to prosecute a murder case?
I did. And obviously unfortunate that these bad things seem to happen when I was on bases, but there was a young airman who was distanced from his spouse and had custody of a beautiful 14-month-old boy and ended up starving his son to death over a period
my
of
gosh.
So I was the criminal chief for the base and ended up handling that case personally myself. And in the Air Force, you really don't see, thank God, a lot of murder cases.
No, you don't. You really don't.
Of a child. So this was hellish in every way, but we were able to, find the body that he disposed in the forest 100 miles away.
Oh my gosh.
I was, directly involved in in everything of the case, including, the actual interview of the suspect where we got him to tell us where his son's remains could be found, which was not easy. So
Wow.
that really taught me a lot, and was, again, another one of those unique experiences. Of course, I wish that event wouldn't have happened. I mean, just incredibly traumatic, right, to deal
Right.
with. But I do feel lucky that I was able to play a role in bringing some measure of justice in the wake of horrific tragedy.
Yes, myself having prosecuted an attempted murder case, a number of child, abuse cases.
Right.
There's just things that like never leave your brain,
Yeah.
and some of those images. But so you excelled in the courtroom, and then at some point you actually deployed. You mentioned this saying your mom had given you carved, and then this Bible that your grandfather had in World War II that you took outside the wire. Tell us about the circumstances that led to your deployment, to the extent that you can, where you went, and kind of how that impacted you. And I think we have a picture.
Sure. So I was lucky to deploy with Special Operations Forces to Afghanistan, and I was the only Air Force JAG in a sea of Army and Navy personnel. Was very lucky to be on the legal team for General Scott Miller, who was most recently the last four-star commander in Afghanistan. But before that is Scotty Miller of Black Hawk Down fame, who
Oh,
was
wow.
mission unit commander on the ground in Mogadishu in 1993. And working for him was an incredible experience. This is the type of leader that you never get out of your system, and the type of leader who changes the way that you lead, because he was truly that human being. I remember when I got to Afghanistan, I'd been there a few weeks. My job was to do a bunch of different things. One thing it did not include was helping with our detention of high value detainees. That said, I was in a lot of meetings where commanders would discuss detainees that were detained the night before in raids overnight across the country. And the refrain that I heard every day was, we can't detain these people. We were handing them over to Afghan authorities. And as you know, at the time, this was 2013, 2014, the Afghan authorities often weren't able to hold them. So we would have, 8-person teams go out, and we might lose a life to detain a high-value Al-Qaeda member or very senior member of the Taliban, only to have them be released a week or two later with American blood on their hands. And I was struck that this was a problem that kept coming up, but there were not an abundance of solutions.
Right.
So I started to look into it and wondered whether we could broker some agreements with parts of the Afghan judicial system that worked really well, that were able to get long sentences, but often for drug cases, not for terrorism. There was this disparity. Drugs were punished in an incredibly intense way, and terrorism, not so much at the time. So I proposed this to General Miller, who's at the time a 2-star, and he looked at me, and I'll never forget, he said, "Make it happen." And I said, "Excuse me, sir?" He said, "Yeah, make it happen." This is the type of thing in the conventional military that would never happen, right? The general young captain and says, "Make it happen." But in the special operations community, it's much different. It really is this meritocratic war of ideas, where the best ideas win. They don't really care who, what is on your shoulders or your neck. They really care about the quality of the idea, not you. And I'll never forget those words, and I often say them to people on my team when they have good ideas, and they're similarly stunned sometimes. What do you mean, make it happen? I mean, make it happen. And so we were able to make it happen. We brokered an agreement, and I was able to lead this process where we were able to get a prosecutorial pathway that ended up getting 20-year sentences for people that were formerly being released. And changed the way that we did that business, and that was all because a general trusted a young officer whose job it was not to solve this problem, to solve the problem. And I think we can learn a lot. I can learn a lot from that experience.
Well, I'll tell you, it makes an abundant amount of sense why you picked your theme, kind of leading innovation amidst uncertainty, because there's nothing more uncertain than, being in the environment you just mentioned, geopolitically, kind of tactically, all of the above, and then, having a problem presented, and finding an innovative solution to that. This is all making sense for me now, Brennan. It's all clicking. Super cool that you were able to do that. I actually, again, this is crazy, all of the connections you and I have, did detainee ops at CENTCOM. I worked for another spectacular leader, General Mattis. So that was quite an experience for me, working for him on the detainee portfolio. But you left the Air Force and then you went over to the NSA, National Security Agency, shortly after the Snowden leaks. I mean, talk about uncertain times where people were really questioning kind of, big data collection, I'll just call it. What's the government doing? How are they collecting things? Tell us a little bit about, just a little bit about your time there, and then we'll get to DOJ.
Right. So I wasn't expecting to leave the military as soon as I did, just around 4 years. But a professor of mine in law school connected me with the General Counsel of the NSA, who was looking for an outside special counsel to come in and advise him and the leadership team in the wake of the Snowden leaks, because the General Counsel at the time, who was a political appointee in the Obama administration, or actually was a career official who had previously served as a staff secretary to President Obama, he was really having an active role at the epicenter of the U.S. government's response, to include advising the White House, day in and day out, 19 hours a day on that. Right. So I ended up being asked to come serve as the first outsider to be the special counsel, and that was an offer that I just couldn't refuse. So I actually left active duty to do that, and ended up having an incredible time. It was, a lot of my mentors told me that it would be insanity for me to join the NSA in the wake of this cataclysmic experience, and they meant well in telling me that, but they were wrong. Yeah. Because you learn the most in times of trouble, in times of conflict, in times of controversy. And that was in
uncertain times.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so it really was a textbook experience in crisis management at high levels. I mean, at the time, folks, it's easy to forget now, but the Snowden leaks were front page news for a year.
Heck yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and it's funny, Brennan, because early on you were thinking intelligence for your career. You wind up at the NSA, kind of at this crisis moment for what does intelligence mean in the United States? What are the correct rules for that? And I find it so interesting that from there you went to the Department of Justice, and those issues of collection of information on U.S. citizens, I think, also pervaded some of your time there. And there was that also connection with drones at some point with the DOJ, because I remember, and I feel like I may at this point have been a colonel. You had since moved on. You're at the DOJ. I'm like doing the DOD's domestic imagery working group, trying to figure out what should the domestic policies be for the military vis-a-vis information collection. And I feel like our paths crossed at this point. And I think that was maybe the first time you really got into drones. Is it my memory correct here?
Right. And I'd worked on drone issues as a JAG on the the kinetic side of the house.
Sure.
In Creech Air Force Base for years, and
law of war, kind of, but the domestic kind of use and policies for a federal agency.
Right. So I left NSA and I clerked in the DC Circuit, but then I went to the Department of Justice. First, just as a career attorney in this really unique office that handles national security law and policy issues, and advises the Attorney General on all manner of things. But I was asked shortly at the beginning of the last administration to begin leading DOJ's drone efforts as a career official, and was able to do that. So at the time, DOJ had a handful of drones in the FBI. They were at And there's some things I can't say, but they were a small number of drones that were essentially at the headquarters level. They weren't dispersed throughout the field. And I saw that as a real missed opportunity, having seen what what the democratization of drones could do at the small unit level, and the type of things that FBI agents do every day with no ability to have eyes in the sky. I guess what really struck me was leaving Afghanistan. It would have been unthinkable for a tier 1 unit to go on a dangerous mission in a rough part of the country without some form of situational awareness, right? Usually
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I totally agree.
Yeah. So, but entering DOJ and now taking over the helm of DOJ's drone program, and keep in mind, DOJ is not a small organization. It's not a bunch of lawyers. It's a 115,000 person entity that's in 100 countries with a $28 billion budget. So this isn't just a bunch of lawyers in DC. This is, global security enterprise that includes 5 law enforcement components. But seeing the type of missions that the FBI was conducting, both in the US and overseas, and understanding that there was almost never situational awareness was a remarkable insight to me that we're doing something wrong. We need to give our 25-year-old agents who are in SWAT teams doing dangerous raids against heavily armed suspects day and night. We need to give them some ability to see around the corner in a literal way.
Well, and on the heels of what you just experienced, right, at NSA and the Snowden leaks and this whole idea of the federal government spying on U.S. citizens, I recall, Brendan, around the same time frame, a flood of state laws popping up, about privacy and law enforcement use of drones, like prohibitions about collecting or gathering evidence unless certain legislative criteria applied. So you're now like, hey, we should be using these drones in the midst of what I would call this, kind of privacy explosion around the technology, these privacy concerns. And so you helped shape how the DOJ would protect privacy. Were you involved in the NTIA's best practices document that people still cite today?
That came just after just before my time at the Department of Justice. And that was really in response to an executive order from President Obama.
Right.
That immediately preceded it. When I joined, again, DOJ was barely using drones, and what we did was put privacy and civil liberties at the dead center of everything we did, which is
had to. Yeah.
Well, we even if we didn't have to, we wanted to, because it aligned with our values as a department, as a country, as a government.
Yep.
And that's really why you don't hear lots of stories, or really any stories, about the misuse of drones in the hands of the U.S. Department of Justice, because there are overlapping layers to protect privacy and civil liberties at every level, from the tactical to the strategic and in the middle. And that's what we were able to do, is to roll out this technology in a way that aligned with our values and had embedded oversight throughout. And this is something that we talk about a lot, and even our current work at Skydio, is if you're a public agency and you want to use new technology, if it's drones or whatever it is, you really should start with a policy and start with your values and then talk about technology, right? Don't just start with technology. Start with principles about responsible use, and then look at technology, not the other way around.
Well, that's a great segue, Brendan, because, you're now one of the key leaders in the C-suite at Skydio. Tell us about that kind of leap from your federal employment over to the private sector, and, a little bit about what you're doing at Skydio. And by the way, we have a great question from Chris Genesis out there that I want to ask you, but I want to hear this kind of journey from DOJ to Skydio, kind of where you are today.
Sure. So at the Justice Department, I was fortunate to spend several years on the FAA Executive Committee for drones. This is the senior interagency body that oversees the integration of drones into the national airspace.
Yes.
And I saw, the transformational potential of drones to improve use cases across the board, primarily but not exclusively in the inspection use case. But it was fairly clear that autonomy was the antidote and the answer. And that's what I didn't see a lot of in the market at the time. So when I met the CEO of Skydio, I realized that this was perhaps the missing link. Skydio at the time was a very small company, very, very small in the Bay Area. We had just released our first sort of mainstream product, the Skydio 2, literally during the time I was interviewing, and was really growing up from an advanced R&D shop to a serious production company. And I took that leap because I believe deeply in the people and the technology and the brass tacks benefits that technology could have for use cases across the board. And I think it was the right call.
Well, clearly, and I'm telling you, they are so lucky to have you with your background, really just perfect fit for this role that you're in. And, Skydio has been really, we've heard about this Chinese drone threat, concerns with cybersecurity, national security. So your background, I think, perfect for where you landed, and Defense Innovation Unit's Blue UAS program. Skydio was one of the first 5. I think it dovetails into this question Chris has asked, and I'd like to ask this if it's okay with you, Brendan. He says, is your employment at Skydio focused on the current trend of adversarial supply chain issues and using those players' hardware software solutions that might have an effect on our national security?
My main role at Skydio, so I play a role in overseeing the legal team. I lead our global regulatory and policy work as well. And I spend a lot of my time focused on working with regulators to realize the benefits of autonomous flight. And we do that through regulatory processes, right? Waivers and exemptions, things like that, both in the US, but also increasingly around the world. And we also do that by working with policymakers to understand that you've had this aviation paradigm that views aviation as requiring a pilot in command, but what if that pilot is assisted by advanced autonomy features that make her better and safer and more efficient? So that's really what I spend the bulk of my time thinking about, is envisioning that future state in which small flying robots work for us and not the other way around. At the same time, it is true that we live in this interesting inflection point in the industry where you've had people that have raised serious concerns, governments and private entities, about cybersecurity and even human rights associated with some of the dominant platforms in the market. So those concerns are real, and certainly that's viewed as a bipartisan concern in Washington and increasingly in other foreign capitals. And that's something that folks are thinking of. Again, at Skydio, we're really focused on building the best products in the planet and working with regulators to achieve those goals. So those are the things I spend the bulk of my waking hours working on and thinking about.
Well, there's so much we can talk about, and our time has flown, but I cannot end this podcast without asking you my balance question, Brendan, because leading innovation in uncertain times, just being a leader at a company like Skydio that continues to kind of bloom and grow and conquer the world. How on earth do you maintain balance in your life? I know we didn't talk a lot about your family. We had a picture earlier with your wife, I believe your wife there, and I know you both just welcomed a child about 7 months ago. So congratulations on that. How do you juggle all of these things? And by the way, we have one last picture I want to show. It's you on the stage at CES this year. And this was just a couple months before your child was born. I remember seeing you there. But so how do you do it, Brendan? How do you have balance in your life?
I'm sure about as well as anyone else watching today does, which is not well at all. Balance is the goal, and maybe it should be, but it's not been my goal. I tend to think of time more like an investment portfolio. You want a diversified portfolio. It's never going to be 50-50. Probably shouldn't be 50-50. It might not even be 60-40. You might have different categories split up differently. The trick, I think, at least for me, and again, I'm probably the worst person to give advice on this topic, is to balance your portfolio correctly during any given period of time, according to the greatest needs with the greatest benefits. And you know, I think that's been difficult, right? So I haven't taken paternity leave, things like that. I try and spend a lot of time with my son.
I just got to interrupt you. By the way, everybody out there, when I asked Brennan to be at my Law Tech Connect workshop at AVSI this spring, that's when he told me he was expecting his first child. And I was like, all right, I'm telling you a life lesson here. You better listen to me. Like, you need to take time off. Like, you are fun. Like, you are actually replaceable, and there's nothing more important. And did you just say you did not take that leave?
I stopped traveling for, a few months, a couple months, and that was really, really helpful and healthy. But I am able to spend, increasing amounts of time. I think again, it's the investment portfolio calculus, and now it's shifting. Our team is growing, so I'm able to spend more time with our little one, which has been fantastic. But during that particular period, there was a lot going on, and wasn't able to downscale to the extent that would have liked. But that's a common story, right? I mean, these things are for lots of people. So I think in the professional classes, it's easy to talk about how much leave you can take, but that's not an option for lots of Americans and lots of people around the world. And it's one of those choices you make, but there's a reason behind it.
Well, that's okay. He's still a little guy, and you got plenty of time. But that first little play that he's in, you need to be taking that time off and going to that. Okay.
Oh, definitely.
All right. We are a little bit over. I know our viewership continues to grow as we've been speaking. So thank you, everybody that's been out there. And by the way, if you haven't subscribed to the full crew, please do so. Hit the subscribe, hit that notification bell. Of course, like us, that's always good, but the notification bell will give you those alerts when we're going live, and that's all you get from that. We don't spam you. So two last things I want to cover, Brennan. First, the first thing is, what's the one thing, of everything as we close today that you maybe learned along the way that you'd like to leave others with?
I think it's probably something that my boss in Afghanistan told me the first day I showed up, which was, I expect you to be 50 meters in front of the firing line at all times. I will celebrate your successes, and I'll take responsibility for your failures. And to this day, it's something that I repeat to every new person on my teams, and something that means a lot to me. So that's the kind of leader that we all ought to strive to be, right? As someone who trusts people to do the job, to set the bar high for them, because they'll often surprise us with how they respond.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And you have, on behalf of Skydio, I know you have a big announcement coming up. So let's kind of end on that, because I think we're talking about leading innovation in uncertain times. I think the drone industry has come a long way. I feel like crawl, walk, run, we're kind of walking, but you guys are flying. And so tell us about this thing that's happening next week.
Right. So on December 7th, we'll be celebrating Doc Day at Skydio, where we'll be sharing a really exciting announcement about what we believe is the future of aviation with respect to small, smart, autonomous aircraft that work for us and not the other way around. We've certainly teased a lot about what we have in store and what we've been working on. There are waivers in the flesh that we have secured for customers to do really innovative things in the world of remote operations. But next week, we'll be taking a peek behind the curtains and showing a little bit more about what we're actually doing and the future that we actually see happening not 10 years from now, but in the very, very, very near future.
Well, super cool. And our good friends at Drone Life just posted out an article today with a registration link for this live event if you want to check that out next week. But once again, Brendan, thank you so much for your time today. I learned so much about you and your background. And now that I see what you're doing today, it just makes an abundant amount of sense. So thank you for sharing with us. Really appreciate you and looking forward to working with you more in 2023.
Thanks, Don. Thanks for what you do.
We are out here, everybody.